Chapter 4, Lesson 1, New England, Commerce and Religion. Main idea. Fishing and trade contributed to the growth and prosperity of the New England colonies. One American story. Peleg Folger, a New England sailor, kept a journal that describes what whaling was like in the 1750s. In one entry, he explained what happened after whales were sighted and small boats were launched to pursue them. A voice from the past. So we rowed about 1.5 miles from the ship, and then a whale come up under us and smashed in our boat, and threw us every man overboard except one. And we all came up and got hold of the boat and held to her until the other boat, which was 1.5 miles off, came up and took us in, all safe, and not one man hurt. By Peleg Folger, quoted in The Sea Hunters. When Folger and his mates killed a whale, they cut a hole in its head and removed large amounts of oil from the animal. When the ship returned to port, this oil was sold to colonists who used it as fuel in their lamps. Many settlers in New England colonies, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, made a living from the sea. The majority of New Englanders, however, were farmers. Distinct colonial regions develop. Between 1700 and 1750, the population of England's colonies in North America doubled and then doubled again. At the start of the century, the colonial population stood at about 250,000. By 1750, more than 1,170,000 settlers called the English colonies home. By the 1700s, the colonies formed 3 distinct regions: the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. Another area was the back country. It ran along the Appalachian Mountains through the far western part of the other regions. Several factors made each colonial region distinct. Some of the most important were each region's climate, resources, and people. Number 1. New England had long winters and rocky soil. English settlers made up the largest group in the region's population. Number 2. The Middle colonies had shorter winters and fertile soil. The region attracted immigrants from all over Europe. Number 3. The Southern colonies had a warm climate and good soil. There, some settlers used enslaved Africans to work their plantations. Number 4. The back country's climate and resources varied depending on the latitude. Many Scots-Irish immigrants settled there. During the colonial era, the majority of people made their living by farming. However, the type of agriculture they practiced depended on the climate and resources in the region where they settled. The farms and towns of New England. Life in New England was not easy. Their growing season was short, and the soil was rocky. Most farmers practiced subsistence farming. That is, they produced just enough food for themselves and sometimes a little extra to trade in town. Most New England farmers lived near a town. This was because colonial officials usually did not sell scattered plots of land to individual farmers. Instead, they sold larger plots of land to groups of people, often to the congregation of a Puritan church. A congregation then settled the town and divided the land among the members of its church. This pattern of settlement led New England towns to develop in a unique way. Usually a cluster of farmhouses surrounded a green, a central square where a meeting house was located and where public activities took place. Because people lived together in small towns, shopkeepers had enough customers to make a living. Also, if the townspeople needed a blacksmith or a carpenter, they could pool their money and hire one. Harvesting the sea. New England's rocky soil made farming difficult. In contrast, the Atlantic Ocean offered many economic opportunities. In one story, a group of settlers was standing on a hill overlooking the Atlantic. One of them pointed out to sea and exclaimed, "There is a great pasture where our children's grandchildren will go for bread." The settlers' prediction came true. Not far off of New England's coast were some of the world's best fishing grounds. The Atlantic was filled with mackerel, halibut, cod, and many other types of fish. New England's forests provided everything needed to harvest these great pastures of fish. The wood cut from iron-hard oak trees made excellent ship hulls. 100-foot wide tall white planes were ideal for masts. Shipbuilders used about 2,500 trees to produce just one ship. New England's fish and timber were among its most valuable articles of trade. Coastal cities like Boston, Salem, New Haven, and Newport grew rich as a result of shipbuilding, fishing, and trade. Atlantic trade. New England settlers engaged in 3 types of trade. First was the trade with other colonies. Second was a direct exchange of goods with Europe. The third type was the triangular trade. Triangular trade was a name given to a trading route with 3 stops. For example, a ship might leave New England with a cargo of rum and iron. In Africa, the captain would trade his cargo for slaves. Slaves then endured the horrible Middle Passage to the West Indies, where they were exchanged for sugar and molasses. Traders then took the sugar and molasses back to New England. There, colonists used the molasses to make rum, and the pattern started over. New England won enormous profits from trade. New England wanted to make sure that it received part of those profits, so the English government began to pass the Navigation Acts in 1651. The Navigation Acts had 4 major provisions designed to ensure that England made money from its colonies' trade. 1. All shipping had to be done in English ships or ships made in the English colonies. 2. Products such as tobacco, wood, and sugar could be sold only to England or its colonies. 3. European imports to the colonies had to pass through English ports. 4. English officials were to tax any colonial goods not shipped to England. But even after the passage of the Navigation Acts, England had trouble controlling colonial shipping. Merchants ignored the acts whenever possible. Smuggling, importing or exporting goods illegally, was common. England also had great difficulty preventing pirates, like the legendary Blackbeard, from interfering with colonial shipping. African Americans in New England. There were few slaves in New England. Slavery simply was not economical in this region of small farms. Also, because the growing season was short, there was little work for slaves during the long winter months. Farmers could not afford to feed and house slaves who were not working. Even so, some New Englanders in larger towns and cities did own slaves. They worked as house servants, cooks, gardeners, and stable hands. In the 1700s, slave owners seldom had enough room to house more than 1 or 2 slaves. Instead, more and more slave owners hired out their slaves to work on the docks or in ships or warehouses. Slave owners sometimes allowed their slaves to keep a portion of their wages. Occasionally, some enslaved persons were able to save enough to buy their freedom. In fact, New England was home to more free blacks than any other region. A free black man might still become a merchant, sailor, printer, carpenter, or landowner. Still, white colonists did not treat free blacks as equals. Changes in Puritan society. The early 1700s saw many changes in New England society. One of the most important was the gradual decline of the Puritan religion. There were a number of reasons for this decline. One reason was that the drive for economic success competed with Puritan ideas. Many colonists, especially those who lived along the coast, seemed to care as much about business and material things as they did about religion. One observer had this complaint. A voice from the past. Boston is so conveniently situated for trade, and the genius of people are so inclined to merchandise, that they seek no other education for their children than writing and arithmetic. An observer in 1713 quoted in A History of American Life. Another reason for the decline of the Puritan religion was the increasing competition from other religious groups. Baptists and Anglicans established churches in Massachusetts and Connecticut, where Puritans had once been the most powerful group. Political changes also weakened the Puritan community. In 1691, a new royal charter from Massachusetts guaranteed religious freedom for all Protestants, not just Puritans. The new charter also granted the vote based on property ownership instead of church membership. This put an end to the Puritan Church's ability to control elections. To the south of New England were the Middle Colonies, which developed in quite different ways, as the next section shows.